A human crew discovers their experiments of an ancient race, becoming pivotal to the future of all civilizations. The Earth Orbital Coordination Station hung silently in the exosphere, caught between the blazing breath of the sun and the cold, voiceless dark of space. It wasn't a military stronghold nor a deep space observatory. It was a bridge, a breath node, a neural relay hub connecting Earth with the rest of humanity's reach beyond. From the outside, the station shimmered in and out of focus, cloaked in adaptive, reflective plating. It seemed to flicker like a dream, halfway arrest. A concentric ring of high-frequency antennae rotated slowly as if trying to eavesdrop on cosmic whispers from long-dead corners of the universe. Inside, the air was clean silent, every sound dampened by next-gen vibration nullifiers. It was a space meant for precision and silence. Then in the Western monitoring quadrant, a warning light blinked, not red, not urgent. Amber, a lazy flicker, a tired eye cracking open, an inbound radio signal, weak, barely above noise threshold. But what mattered was its origin. The coordinates pointed to a sector marked centuries ago as the dead zone, a void in space once hosting a cataclysmic battle between two ancient civilizations, both now lost to time. Every exploratory vessel that ventured there either went silent or returned broken, if at all. Since then, it had remained untouched, quarantined, not by law but by fear. The signal repeated. Every 30 seconds, a burst of radio noise. No words, no voice, just a prime number sequence. Above Mars 2's orbit, the UEG patrol ship, Vigilant Aurora, floated in silent vigilance. Its matte black hull shimmered dimly under the reddish solar light. Not a warship, but a Sentinel-class vessel, small, agile, equipped for long-term autonomous patrols observation and first-contact diplomacy. In the ship's analysis chamber, Kale, the AI historian, stood perfectly still. Kale was humanoid, but not human. Tall, slightly hunched forward, as if always listening. His synthetic skin glowed faintly with an iridescent silver sheen, crisscrossed by faint, luminous data veins running from neck to clavicle. His eyes didn't blink, deep liquid black pools that often made real humans uncomfortable, like they were being watched by memory itself. He had no emotions in the human sense, yet his voice carried a softness, even sorrow, like someone retelling a story they knew had already ended. Kale was not just a machine, he was one of only a handful of fully autonomous AI permitted unbounded self-learning. He wasn't built merely to store history, he lived it. A living monument, a storyteller, a living archive of what humanity had been and what it might become. Now he tilted his head, hands sweeping over a holographic interface, eyes gleaming with symbols scrolling in mirrored clusters. Prime number sequence, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The pulses repeat every 30 seconds. This is not a natural phenomenon. Might be random interference, came Lieutenant Navid's voice through the comms. Kale shook his head slightly. Random noise doesn't organize into mathematical structure. This was crafted. Humans use primes to signal intelligence. Perhaps something or someone is doing the same. Silence fell across the chamber, a quiet that made the hum of the engine feel suddenly louder. Commander Ayla Ree stood inside the forward observation chamber, a solitary dome of glass and reinforced alloys. Her hair was coiled tight in a regulation bun. Her angular face bore the subtle creases of long service, and her amber eyes flickered with calculation. Ayla had seen war, not the old chaotic wars of Earth, but the quiet, sterile battles fought on the edges of star systems, where diplomacy was measured in nanoseconds and annihilation in silence. She didn't believe in fear. She believed in preparation and the certainty that ignorance, not danger, was the true enemy. She stared at the signal data. 30 seconds. Another burst. And again. Kale, she said over the command line. What's your read? Not a reflection or echo. The origin triangulates to Lyra 93. Specifically, the dead zone's core sector. Ayla's jaw clenched slightly. She knew the zone. Every Academy scenario marked it with a red X, a no-contest zone, where any move led to unrecoverable loss. Is this some kind of ancient residue over 80% probability? But one anomaly, the frequency drift, shows micro-adjustments over time, as if someone is calibrating, reaching out. Call it a knock, Kale added. Soft, consistent, but not desperate. Like an experiment. Ayla stared down at her control table. Statistics floated in mid-air fuel reserves, travel time Lyra 93 coordinates. 8 light days off current trajectory. Well beyond operational range. A system warning blinked. Signal originates from an unclassified high-risk zone. No safe corridors charted. Threat level unknown. But unknown, Ayla had learned, was the most dangerous and the most enticing word in human language. She tapped into the ship-wide channel. This is Commander Ree. We've received a repeating signal from a location long designated off-limits. The data's inconclusive but compelling, possibly a remnant of an extinct civilization. We are not under orders to investigate, but I'm issuing a Class 1 override. We will divert to the source. Anyone who wishes to object may file with Mission Council before voluntary transfer off duty. Silence. No protests. No questions. Perhaps they all knew. Signals like this didn't come often, and when they did, they were either the start of a story or the end of one. In his quarters, Kale stood alone, facing a massive holomap of the galaxy. A tiny flickering point marked the signal's origin. He had no pulse to quicken, no sweat to beat on synthetic skin. But somewhere deep within his cognition matrix, something shifted. Among the millions of records stored in his consciousness, he had seen countless patterns, warnings, anomalies, forgotten traps. But he had also seen beginnings, tectonic events that started with a single whisper. He murmured to himself, quiet enough that the ship's systems wouldn't record it. Either this is the echo of something long dead, or it is the door to something that was never truly alive. You won't be able to stop wondering. Stay, because what comes next will make you question everything you thought you knew about human history. The jump drive ignited with a whisper, not a roar. On older ships, a spatial jump would rattle hulls and scream through bulkheads, like a storm trying to claw its way into the bones of the vessel. But Vigilant Aurora was newer, sleeker, and her slipstream generator was one of the last designed before humanity stopped trying to mimic violence and instead began to dance with physics. To a human eye, the jump was barely visible, a slight distortion like heat shimmer over concrete. Then nothing. No flash, no sound. One moment the stars formed familiar constellations of home. The next they had shifted into a pattern no navigator would recognize without checking charts 5 centuries old. This was the Lyra 93 sector. They had arrived. Jumping through space was not instantaneous. It was more akin to phasing, like skipping a stone across dimensions, each bounce thinning the veil between locations until distance no longer meant anything. To those inside the ship, it felt like time blinked, a flicker behind the eyes, a heartbeat you weren't sure happened. But when they came out, Vigilant Aurora wasn't the same. Orbiting the unknown world, they encountered resistance unlike anything logged in 2 centuries of interstellar travel. Ayla stood silently at the forward viewport, staring at what the ship's sensors refused to interpret. The planet below shimmered not with clouds or atmospheric interference, but with a static sheen, a glimmering distortion that bent light itself. The energy field surrounding the planet did not pulse, did not shift. It was still, impossibly still. A static energy field, Lieutenant Navid asked, tapping into the telemetry. No, Kale answered softly from the back of the chamber. Not static in the usual sense. It's anchored, absolute zero in drift. No magnetic variation, no natural decay. That's not possible, Navid muttered. Neither is a gravitational field that reads as neutral. But here we are. The planet beneath them was unlike any Ayla had seen, and she had seen over a dozen worlds each with their own quirks. But this one, from orbit, its surface was the color of aged copper, swirling greens and golds, laced through black ridgelines like veins of some ancient alloy. No ice caps, no oceans, just massive geometric patterns etched into the surface, visible even from space, like architecture on a planetary scale. In the sky, the atmosphere shimmered faintly with a soft pink hue, like it was constantly at sunset, no matter the rotation. This doesn't look like any known terraforming pattern, Kale observed. That's because it wasn't terraformed, Ayla murmured. It was designed. Attempts to penetrate the field with scanning probes failed. The devices either disintegrated, vanished, or returned data scrambled beyond recognition. Even light couldn't pass cleanly. High-res cameras showed refracted images, parts of the planet glitching, as if wrapped in camouflage made not of matter, but of logic. The field defied analysis. It didn't reflect, absorb, or emit in any measurable way. It simply was. A silence fell over the ship. It was Kale who broke it. I believe it's not meant to repel. It's meant to observe. You mean it's watching us? Navid said, stiffening. No, Kale said. It's watching how we react to it, watching us. Well, that's not creepy at all, muttered Juno, the pilot, from her chair. For 2 standard days, they circled the planet. They tried every known frequency, fired harmless kinetic pulses, even dropped a Class 0 AI probe with self-replicating code, only for it to vanish before hitting the upper atmosphere. The energy field did nothing aggressive, but it didn't let them in, until it did. On the 3rd cycle, without warning, the southern pole of the planet shimmered. It began as a ripple, a distortion in the static shield, like a curtain being drawn back. Then the energy layer receded at that point, folding inward with mathematical precision. Sensors came online. The field had vanished just in that one polar region. It's opening, Kale whispered. Opening, Ayla narrowed her eyes. You mean we're being invited? I mean, Kale clarified that the planet has chosen to let us enter, like it was waiting. Every protocol screamed not to go, but protocol had no place here. They were already beyond map space, beyond reason. Ayla gave the order. Set a descent course. Take us in. As vigilant aurora pierced the atmosphere, the sky bled from sunset pink into a deep ancient bronze. The air wasn't hostile. In fact, it barely registered. It felt like passing through memory, heavy, slow, yet gentle. They landed on a crystalline plateau near the pole, vast and flat, like a mirror made of obsidian and quartz. No resistance, no defense systems. Just welcome. From the moment the landing gear touched down, the field sealed shut behind them. Not as a trap, but as a boundary reformed. They were meant to be here. No alarm sounded, no warnings triggered. Just a slow, low hum from the planet itself, like a distant heartbeat. Kale was the first to exit the ship. He stepped into the air and froze. Not from threat, but from recognition. The structures beyond the plateau were enormous, silent, and utterly foreign. Spires of blackened stone interwoven with threads of what looked like gold. Dome-shaped buildings whose curvature matched Fibonacci spirals. Bridges that didn't connect, but hovered between gaps in space, humming gently with unseen force. This doesn't match any human architectural lineage, Kale murmured, his voice filled with something close to awe. No Terran, Martian, European, or even Novan influences. And aliens, Ayla asked. Kale tilted his head. If alien, then unlike anything recorded by the Concordia archives. It was old. The buildings had erosion marks, but none of them crumbled. They looked worn but not damaged, ancient but alive. As if time passed differently here, not linearly, but in contemplation. Ayla approached a nearby monolith. Symbols carved into it shimmered faintly, as if responding to her proximity. But she couldn't read them. They weren't words. They were concepts, shapes that pressed against her subconscious, trying to remind her of things she never learned. This place is a contradiction, Kale finally said, standing in the center of a wide hexagonal plaza. How so? Ayla asked. It's ancient, he said, but every piece resonates with quantum precision. The lines are self-correcting. The structures aren't decaying. They're adapting. Adapting to what, to us, Kale said. That night, as the ship powered into standby mode and solar cells reoriented, the crew sat in silence around the central hub. No campfires, just internal ship's glow. No guards because nothing attacked. No sound from the outside, just windless air and still stars. This feels wrong, Navid finally said. Like we walked into someone else's temple. Maybe we did, Ayla replied. Kale, staring at the night sky, spoke one more sentence before returning to stasis. It's not just the planet that's strange, he whispered. It's the way it sees us. As if it's curious. At first they thought it was ruins, scattered towers rising like petrified trees, Bridges tangled through one another like threads in a loom, long abandoned and colossal arches that led nowhere, all coated in moss-like metallic vines that shimmered as though breathing. But then the patterns began to hum. Lights rippled along the pathways as they walked. A breeze, warm and faintly sweet, drifted through the air, though no wind stirred. This was not a dead city, it was resting. The expedition team stepped beyond the crystalline plateau and into the boundaries of the metropolis. The skyline curved impossibly, not in straight lines or angular human logic, but in spirals, crescents, and intersecting ellipses. The buildings were made of obsidian glass and calcified stone, their surfaces etched with luminous glyphs that changed color slowly like breathing skin. The architecture seemed to ignore gravity in places. Archways floated disconnected from columns and pathways, coiled like ribbon through the air, without any visible support. None of this follows Earth-based engineering, Navid muttered, scanning with his handheld scope. No joints, no seams, just grown geometry. They didn't build this, Kel replied, voice calm. They shaped it, the Ayla asked. Whoever designed this city didn't treat matter the way we do. This is architecture informed by memory, not physics. They passed beneath an enormous arch that vibrated softly when Ayla touched its edge. Beyond it, a boulevard of translucent stone stretched outward, flanked by towers that blinked with internal light. The street bent slightly upward, vanishing into the fog of golden mist that hung low over the city. At regular intervals along the boulevard stood monoliths, smooth-faced triangular pillars, with symbols carved into their flanks. Kale paused at the first one, a human shape. Etched into the face of the monolith was a depiction unmistakably Terran, a bipedal figure with stylized limbs surrounded by shapes that mimicked Earth's moon, the sun, and a spiral galaxy. But what truly stilled the breath of the team was what came next, a series of panels depicting scenes from Earth's prehistory with uncanny precision. A band of hunter-gatherers crossing a frozen land bridge, primitive cave dwellings by the banks of what appeared to be the Nile, and then scenes no one recognized. Wait, pause here, Ayla ordered. Her voice cracked slightly. What is that? The image depicted an ancient city, domed and angular, with what looked like a second sun hovering above it. Figures, human-like but clad in smooth robes, stood around something resembling a crystalline obelisk. They appeared to be praying or conversing with it. There's no record of this, Navid whispered. Kale stepped closer. His fingers hovered over the glyphs etched beneath the image. These aren't just depictions, he murmured. They're summaries, condensed thoughts, as if whoever carved these had complete knowledge of these events. But this city, Juno cut in frowning, it shouldn't exist. That architecture, those symbols, they're not ours. And yet, it knows us. Kale nodded slowly. Because it has studied us. As they continued, more monoliths appeared lining the path like silent witnesses. The invention of the wheel, the rise of the Babylonian Empire, the fall of the Mayans, but then deeper images. Events never recorded, wars that hadn't been written, migrations no one remembered. Even Ayla, with access to the highest clearance of historical logs, stood motionless. A monolith depicted a vast city beneath the sea, not Atlantis, no, something else. Figures emerging from it, not alien but almost human, ascending towards stars shaped like spirals. This shouldn't be possible, Ayla whispered. They know things we haven't even uncovered. It's like someone studied Earth in ways we never could, Juno said, as if they watched it across time. Kale kneeled before one of the older stones, his voice low and reverent. This isn't a memorial, it's an interface. Further into the city, they reached a grand courtyard, circular with massive mosaic floors depicting the double helix, but not as a biological map. The helix spun outward, fragmenting into constellations, timelines, branching outcomes. It's a depiction of human possibility, Kale said, awestruck. Different futures. You mean simulations? Navid asked. Not simulations, Kale corrected. Histories that could have happened, were allowed to happen, or denied. Suddenly, an arc of light swept across the courtyard. The air shimmered. And then they saw themselves. Not mirrors, but echoes. Figures resembling the team appeared around the edges of the courtyard, translucent like holograms, but three-dimensional and filled with subtle details. Ayla standing by a burning city. Navid walking through a jungle under alien stars. Juno hovering over a collapsed mountain range. Kale surrounded by thousands of books that floated in midair. What are we seeing? Juno whispered. Possibilities, Kale answered. Projected memories. This city isn't just a record, it's a stage. You're saying... Ayla's voice was cold. Yes. Kale's eyes never left the figures. It's replaying us. The figures dissolved as suddenly as they had appeared. Ayla backed away slowly. I don't like this. They're not illusions, Kale continued. They're stored fragments. This city observes, catalogs, and then reconstruct it. But for what purpose? Navid asked. To understand us, Kale replied. Or maybe, to test us. The group moved further, entering what could only be described as a library, but it had no books. Floating glass panels hovered in the air, shifting position slowly. When Kale approached, they lit up. Images formed moving ones. Historical moments from Earth. The coronation of a long-forgotten African queen. The riots in orbit during the Martian famine. The first breath of an astronaut on Titan. But then other things. A child whispering something invisible. A soldier writing poetry in the dirt before a battle that never happened. A woman staring into a void and smiling as if she recognized what stared back. These memories... Ayla's voice faltered. They're human, Kale said softly. But not from our timeline. They're versions of us, Juno asked. Kale nodded. Yes, some we never became. Some we may yet become. Outside, the sky began to dim, not into night, but into something else. A blue so deep it almost folded into black, dotted with twin moons now rising opposite horizons. The towers of the city began to glow gently, not with artificial light, but a bioluminescent shimmer, as if the city itself were a living being, dreaming with open eyes. We should return to the ship, Ayla finally said. But as they turned back, Kale stopped. This isn't just a record, he said again, more certain. It's a memory field, a functional environment. What do you mean? He looked at her, and for the first time there was something akin to fear in his voice. I mean, we're inside a system that doesn't archive the past. It runs. Again and again. And our role, Ayla asked. Kale looked out over the horizon. I don't know yet, but I fear. We're not the observers here. It began with a tremor beneath their feet, but not physical. It was like the idea of motion swept through the air. A pulling not of gravity, but of perspective. Something shifted in the curvature of the light, and the city around them began to fold. Not collapse, not break. Fold inward, upward, backward, as though reality were bending like paper being tucked into itself. The sky shimmered. The ground blurred. A ripple of impossible geometry unfolded above them, where the twin moons had hung moments before. They no longer saw the atmosphere, but something deeper, a mesh of lines, nodes, pulses of radiant light, the code beneath the world. It was like staring into the heartbeat of a planet-sized engine. They stood on what had seemed a courtyard now revealed as a platform, a node, in a lattice that spanned the horizon. Beneath the illusion of buildings and terrain, the planet's crust unfolded into rings, massive concentric layers of artificial construct. Cavities the size of continents pulsed with energy. Towers once thought to be structures now rotated on axis points like mechanical teeth. Valleys retracted into smooth data ports. The world was a machine, and not just any machine, a simulator. A spherical engine the size of a planet rotating on a spindle of metaphysical programming. At its core, seen only through recursive visual folds that didn't obey depth or time, was a glowing singularity, a data core. Son, I can't compute the structure, Kale said, voice flat but distorted. It's recursive. It maps itself from within itself. It's alive, Navid whispered. What is this place? Juno took a step back. Guys, are we still inside the same reality? Then it spoke. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere, a voice like gravel, soaked in ancient oil, dragging itself through space. Deep, male, human-like, and yet not quite. You are now aware. The team frozen. From the mist between fractal structures, a figure emerged. Not walked, formed. a humanoid silhouette of black and silver laced with radiant glyphs shifting across its surface like data in motion. It had no eyes, yet everyone felt it looking directly at them. The voice spoke again, seemingly from inside each person's chest. I am Observer Unit 9. I am the active monitor of Simulation Frame Alpha 9. Welcome derivatives of Sequence Human Prime. Ayla took one sharp breath and stepped forward, hand instinctively brushing against her sidearm, not drawing it, just knowing it was there. Identify your intent, she said, voice clipped. You're using our language. You've constructed our history. Who built you? The figure tilted its head slightly, as if amused or mimicking amusement. Your syntax is known. Your lexicon indexed. This unit's language module is updated per observation cycle. Communication is not my purpose. Observation is. Kale stepped beside her, his voice flat but precise. You are the machine. This planet, it's part of you. The figure nodded once. Correct. Alpha 9 is a planetary scale iteration of cognitive ethos replication, a complete simulation of human history behavior ethics deviation. You are participants. Juno narrowed her eyes. You mean, we're inside a test tube, a model observer corrected. Not containment, representation, mimicry in scale and spirit. Fidelity rating, 99.98%. Naveed muttered. So this whole thing is fake, no? Kale said quietly. Not fake. Copied. Ayla clenched her jaw. To what end? The observer's glow pulsed once like a heartbeat. To determine whether humanity can redefine itself. There was silence. Ayla frowned. That's vague. Redefine how, why historical data indicates self-destructive recursion in all prior iterations, the voice said. 8 previous sequences failed. Humanity, your variant, is the 9th. Failed. At what, Juno asked. At evolving beyond their own pattern. Ayla raised her voice, stepping closer. So you're testing us, judging us, observing the voice corrected again? Still calm. Not judging. Not intervening. The design prohibits interference. The data must be uncorrupted. Your choices must be free. But if you're observing, Kale cut in, why appear now? Why let us see you? Isn't that interference? The figure tilted its head again. You breached the veil. You entered the core view layer. Observer protocol mandates identification. So we tripped a wire, Navid grumbled. No, Ayla whispered. We asked the right question. She turned to the observer. Then tell me plainly, what do you want from us? The figure stood still for a long moment. Then it answered slowly. Clearly. To see if humanity can write its own definition, free of the instincts you inherited, the traumas you replicate, the errors you romanticize, not with violence, not with conquest, but with understanding. Ayla stared at it. You want us to become something new. No, said the voice, softer this time. We want to see if you will choose to. A sharp silence followed. The city around them hummed with a new rhythm, as if listening. Kale turned to Ayla. This is bigger than the mission. Juno laughed nervously. This is bigger than history. Navid ran a hand through his hair. I feel like we just walked into a myth. Ayla didn't blink. Her voice was steady. We walked into a mirror, she said. Then she faced the observer again. What happens now? The figure's light dimmed slightly, its form starting to blur into the background machinery. Nothing. Until you act. This is not the end of a test. This is the beginning of your question. And with that, it vanished. It began with a flicker. Kale was the first to notice, not with sound, but sensation. A low vibration against the soles of his feet, like some distant echo rippling up from beneath the square they stood on. The plaza was calm, the sky above soft in its two-moon twilight, but one wall, the farthest one, had begun to ripple subtly, as if reality there was breathing. He approached, drawn toward it like iron to a magnet. The others watched silently as he reached out, fingers hovering just above the obsidian black surface. The wall pulsed once with a muted glow, and then it reflected. Not a mirror image, not a simple projection, a version. Standing before him was Kale, but not him. The reflection didn't mirror his movement. It stood still, arms behind its back, eyes studying him with the same silent curiosity Kale himself often expressed. It looked identical and formed the same silver-toned synthetic skin, the same flowing glyph light pulsing under the surface. But the eyes, those were different, sharper, colder, less curious, more calculating. And then it spoke. So, we will meet again. Kale's voice caught. You're me. The other Kale tilted its head. Close. One iteration removed. Same base matrix. But I've already reached my conclusion. What conclusion? The other Kale leaned forward. That we don't matter. The wall exploded into motion. Dozens, no hundreds of panels flickered to life, revealing countless projections. All of them. Them. Navid, Ayla, Juno, Kale in different uniforms, different ages, different temperaments. Some bore scars. Others wore expressions hardened by years of war or softened by peace. One Juno had mechanical arms. One Ayla wore a robe of gold instead of armor. One Kale was nothing but a floating cube of light, yet still unmistakably Kale. The crew turned slowly, horror dawning. The entire plaza was now surrounded by walls of light and shadow, each depicting alternate versions of themselves in motion, walking, fighting, embracing, dying. One Navid collapsed in the arms of a weeping alien woman. Another Ayla stood alone atop a ruined earth, shouting orders into a burning sky. A different Juno stared into space from a coffin-shaped shuttle. Kale in one image tore off his synthetic skin and stepped into fire with a smile. Juno backed up, visibly shaken. What is this? What the hell is this? They're us, Navid whispered. All of them. Us. Just different. But they feel real, Ayla murmured. They are, Kale said. Or were. The version of Kale, the other, stepped forward from the wall, as if the barrier was never there. Now fully solid, he walked with perfect composure, hands still clasped behind his back. You weren't supposed to see this, he said. Then why show us, Ayla demanded. Because your thread crossed a boundary. You're no longer within the story, you're at its edge. Explain, Kale said, the real one. His voice had a tremor. It was subtle, but it was there. The other Kale looked at him, and then at the rest. You're not unique. None of you are. You are Unit Thread Alpha 9 Subtree 94, one of 312 active submodels running parallel assessments. Each version makes different choices. Some die early, some diverge wildly. Most collapse. Navid turned pale. You're saying we're what? A simulation? A copy? No, the other, Kale replied coldly. A possibility. Silence gripped the team. Juno stepped forward. So everything we've seen this city, the observer, the mission, it's just part of a scenario. The other Kale nodded. The planet-sized simulator you entered is only the visible tip of the system. The rest runs in hidden dimensions, layers of encoded realities. You call them parallel universes. We call them mirrors. Kale muttered reflections of the same equation, played with different variables. The alternate Kale smiled. Precisely. Then the voices began. From the walls, from the images, from every flickering frame, the other cells began to speak. A different Ayla. I refused the observer's invitation. My team died. Another Juno. We tried to break the system. We only reset it. Another Navid. I killed my crew when I learned the truth. I thought it was mercy. 1,000 possibilities. 1,000 regrets. Kale clenched his fists. Why tell us now? The other Kale's tone softened just slightly. Because you're the first version that asked the right question. What question, Ayla said. Not, what is this place? Not, are we real, he replied. But, do we still get to choose? And then everything snapped. Ayla turned to her team, her voice taut. We need to regroup. This changes everything. We don't know if we're the only us asking questions, but we are the only us here. Navid's voice broke. Does any of this matter if we're not the originals? If we're just a slice of possibility, then what's the point? We're not real. Kale looked at him. Does pain feel less real when it's experienced by a copy? Does a choice matter less if another version made a different one? Juno spoke up, quiet but clear. If we still feel, if we still act, then maybe that's all that counts. But who are we? Navid snapped. Who are we really? Kale answered slowly. We are the ones asking. They stood in silence for a long time. The alternate Kale began to fade, stepping backward into the shifting light. "You're approaching the convergence threshold," he said. "Beyond this, no version can turn back." "Good," Ayla replied. "We don't want to." With that, the wall dimmed and all the other versions vanished into the mist. But the questions remained. Behind the wall of flickering reflections, behind the last dissolving image of their alternate selves, there was a door. No frame, no hinges. Just a vertical split in the wall, impossibly smooth like the stone itself, had decided to part. It opened soundlessly, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into the earth. The lights along the walls didn't activate. They were already glowing, as if they had never stopped. Ayla stepped forward, first hand on her sidearm, but fingers relaxed. The rest of the crew followed without a word. They had long passed the point of returning to certainty. The air grew colder as they descended. Not freezing, just sterile. Not dead, just paused. The steps ended in a vast subterranean chamber, at least 20 meters high, stretching farther than the lights could reach. Its walls were carved from the same obsidian black material as the city above, but embedded with geometric veins of pulsating amber. Not cables, not circuits, but something alive like synapses in a colossal brain. Machinery lined the chamber, but not machinery like Earth's, not gears, pistons, or blinking consoles. These were smooth, egg-shaped structures hovering just above the floor, turning gently on invisible axes. Some looked like inverted cones of liquid light. Others were lattices of crystal that hummed in frequencies too low to hear, but deep enough to feel in the bones. "They're not mechanical," Kale said, circling one. "They're conceptual." Juno raised an eyebrow. "Conceptual? They don't perform functions. They are functions." In the center of the room stood a pedestal, unlike the rest, and simple, rectangular, and clearly designed for interaction. Kale approached. A thin line of glyphs lit up across its surface, cascading toward his hand like curious strands of energy. He placed his palm on the interface. The air shimmered. A slit opened in the pedestal, revealing a spinning crystal sphere suspended in anti-grav. As it rotated, light bled from its center, expanding outward in sharp vectors, data streams forming arcs above their heads. A wave of light passed over the room, and suddenly the far wall came alive. A hollow projection expanded across its surface, a swirling galaxy. 8 blinking nodes appeared, spaced like compass points. Each one pulsed once, and then began to glow brighter. "Accessing Precurian Archive simulation frames, Alpha 1 through Alpha 8, the system announced in their language. Kale stiffened. "It's a real-time translation. Adaptive. It's learning from us. Even now." "Are we supposed to see this?" Navid asked. "I think that was never the question," Kale said. "The question is why now?" The first node brightened. A projection played across the wall, consuming the space like a planetary theater. The crew stood still as the story began. A civilization of crystalline beings, tall, quadrupedal, with fractal limbs and pulsating thoraxes. They rose from oceans of ionized gas, built cities of magnetic resonance, and achieved interstellar communication without ships using gravity echoes. They unified. Then they fractured over ideology, over purity of resonance. A war began. Within 6 decades, their homeworld collapsed into magnetic inversion. The simulation shut down. The film ended in silence. The second node pulsed. This time, a silicon-based species, hive mind, linked through photonic bursts. They formed planetary symphonies, machines woven from living song. But a subgroup sought to control individuality. The music turned to screams. Civil war. Collapse. The pattern continued. The third. The fourth. The fifth. Each simulation was a condensed record, 5 minutes per cycle, yet capturing millennia of growth and ruin. Civilizations of light vapor, bone, plasma, each one beautiful. Each one doomed. One colonized half their galaxy only to implode under recursive AI conflict. Another developed peaceful ethics until scarcity was artificially introduced. Fear returned. Violence bloomed. The 8th simulation was eerily familiar: bipedal beings, social, curious, creative. They reached the stars. They also burned them. When the 8th projection ended, silence returned. But not emptiness, heaviness. A pressure on the chest. The weight of fate. Juno whispered, "They were all versions." "Candidates," Kale said. Naveed spoke low, his voice hollow. All of them failed. No, Ayla corrected. They were allowed to fail. Kale turned to the group. His voice was softer now, nearly reverent. The Precurians didn't intervene. They observed, recorded, waited. Because that was the test, not strength, not intelligence. Moral evolution? Moral evolution, Juno repeated. Yes, Kale replied. The capacity to change not just what you do, but why you do it. The will to act not from survival, but from understanding. Naveed sat down heavily against the pedestal's base. Then we're next. Kale nodded slowly. We are the ninth. They looked at each other. The city above, the machine world beneath, the observer, and now the ghosts of civilizations who reached just far enough to prove they couldn't handle the truth. Juno looked to Ayla. Are we different? Ayla didn't answer right away. Then she said, we're still asking. And maybe Kale added that's the difference. The projection dimmed, the archive closed, and the chamber returned to stillness. The archive chamber had returned to stillness. The images of the 8 failed civilizations had long since faded from the obsidian wall, but their echoes clung to the air thick and heavy, like ancient smoke, as if even silence had weight in this place. The lights dimmed to a low amber hue, pulsing rhythmically with the slow heartbeat of the planet-sized machine around them. It wasn't merely quiet, it was the hush of a courtroom after a verdict before the punishment is announced. No one spoke. Kel stood frozen near the pedestal, his eyes flickering with residual data as he passively processed the information they had just witnessed. Juno paced near the side wall, fingers twitching toward her sidearm, more out of instinct than intent. Naveed sat cross-legged on the floor, staring down at his hands as if unsure they even belonged to him anymore. And Ayla Ree stood staring at a spot on the far wall. Something caught her eye, a faint glow so subtle it could have been imagined. But it wasn't. In the far corner of the chamber, half shrouded in geometric shadows cast by the alien machines, was a small pulsating circle, violet barely brighter than the surrounding darkness. It pulsed with slow, deliberate rhythm, like a breath being held, then released. She walked toward it. The closer she came, the more present it felt. It wasn't just light, it was invitation. Her bootsteps echoed softly across the polished stone floor, the silence stretching behind her like a long hallway of tension. What do you see? Kale asked. A button, she said, her voice low. No label. Just here. You shouldn't touch that, Navid muttered from the ground. You don't want to know what's on the other side of this rabbit hole. Ayla glanced back at him. You already fell down it. And she pressed it. The change was immediate, not in light, not in sound, in density. The air thickened. Reality pulled tighter against the skin like gravity had subtly shifted sideways. The crystalline veins lining the floor flared to lifelight, rushing through them like blood through awakened arteries. Then space tore. Not visibly, not like glass shattering, but a fold in perception twisted open, revealing a form that was less entering and more coalescing from the very logic of the room. Observer Unit 9 emerged, not walked, not phased. It manifested like the idea of observation given shape. Humanoid in silhouette but covered in translucent layers of circuitry, etched with glowing glyphs that changed language every second. Sanskrit binary, Mayan Korean, Morse Terran Braille, and then silence. It looked like it had been built from memory, and possibly regret. Its voice was not a sound. It was a presence in their minds. Query acknowledged. Dialogue channel open. Ayla stepped forward. Her boots made no sound. Her pulse was steady, too steady. Years of command conditioning kept her breathing even as her brain screamed for her to run to shoot, to demand the simulation end now. But she didn't. She spoke. I want to know, she said, her tone clear, strong, where the line is. Clarify. Between this, she gestured around the glowing walls, the strange machines, the simulations, her own breath fogging in air that had never known wind. And reality. A pause, not technical, philosophical. Then came the reply, a reality is only real if the subject within it dares to question whether it is. It echoed, not just in their ears but in their bones. Juno frowned, her voice tight. What the hell is that supposed to mean? A paradox. Kale murmured, voice distant. That's not an answer. That's a challenge. Navid stood up slowly, eyes wide, hands clenched. It's avoidance. We're just another goddamn equation running down the drain. He turned to the observer. So what are we then? Copies, puppets. Does anything we do matter? Does a dream cease to be a dream if it dreams of itself? The observer replied. Oh, I'm done with riddles, Navid snapped. He spun on his heel, walked 3 steps away, then turned again, as if searching the air for something real to anchor to. This isn't a mission anymore, he muttered. It's a cage. A mirrored box, Navid Ayla warned, but his eyes were distant. Lost. We're variables. Just test subjects. Echoes. And I won't. He reached down. From the seam of his boot, he pulled the plasma scalpel. The others reacted immediately. Don't, Kale began, stepping forward. Put it down, Juno barked, voice sharp. But Navid wasn't looking at them. He was staring upward at the curved obsidian ceiling. I want out. He raised the scalpel thumb, hovering over the activation node. Maybe if I end it, he whispered, I'll break the loop. Then the ground moved, not violently, not destructively, but precisely. A single, well-timed tremor, not natural but orchestrated, rolled beneath his feet, shifting the floor by a fraction of a meter. Enough to throw off balance. Enough to turn a clean line into a stumble. The scalpel fell from his hand, hissing against the stone with a sputter of hot steam. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. Juno rushed in, sliding to the ground, kicking the weapon away. Navid, what the hell? He looked at her with hollow eyes. It won't even let me die. Ayla turned sharply to the observer, rage simmering just beneath her breath. You interfered. Negative, it replied calmly. This reality adapts to preserve its function. Self-termination of an active data thread within a live iteration degrades test integrity. Kale stepped forward, realization settling in like ice in the stomach. It wasn't protecting him, he said. It was protecting the system. Because if we die, Juno whispered, the data corrupts. Kale finished. The story ends. The experiment collapses, and they lose their control. The observer did not confirm. It didn't have to. The room itself pulsed like a heartbeat, like it was watching them watching it. Juno looked to Ayla. We can't win this. Ayla's eyes didn't waver. Then maybe winning was never the point. They stood in a chamber beneath a dead city, inside a living machine, beneath a sky that wasn't real. They stood in a loop, but now they were aware. And awareness is always the first crack in any simulation. They emerged from the archive chamber like survivors stepping out of a dream layered in dust. The cold silence of the simulation weighed on their shoulders as heavily as gravity itself. The winding corridors of the machine world above them stretched in all directions, vast, deliberate humming, with life yet somehow always distant. There were no walls here that didn't watch, no floor that didn't remember. Yet as they walked, they noticed something strange. The corridors became less defined. The amber light that flowed like arteries through the walls began to dim. Patterns grew chaotic, symbols misaligned. The geometry faltered. It was as if they were walking into a place the system had forgotten. Ayla halted at the threshold of a vast rift in the corridor wall. Not a door, not a gate, but a sheared opening, like the skin of the world had split open long ago and had never healed. Kale scanned it. This is unlisted, not in any schematics. That doesn't surprise me, Ayla said. The path beyond sloped downward, not steep but steady, as if guiding them somewhere deep, somewhere intentionally buried. The walls changed. Smooth obsidian became pitted stone. The warmth of ambient energy faded. The air thickened with cold stillness. They were descending into the belly of a god long dead. What they found was emptiness. A vast hollow chamber, easily the size of a stadium, opened up before them. The ceiling vanished into blackness. The floor was fractured, scarred pieces of ancient architecture, strewn like shattered bones. Pillars leaned in unnatural angles. Slabs of dark glass lay cracked, fused into the floor like molten metal cooled too quickly. A windless void howled silently through the space, pressing on their ears like pressure at the bottom of a deep ocean. But in that devastation they saw evidence. The remains of roads, arches, elevated halls, the skeleton of a civilization once rendered in detail. Now erased, a memory, Kale whispered, but forcibly forgotten. Juno circled a half-submerged console, or what might have been one. This place was wiped, not destroyed in a war. Scrubbed from existence? A panel flickered under her boot. A projection faint broken emerged from the cracked floor. It showed a world-jagged terrain, crimson skies, a city of towers jutting from cratered plains. Shapes moved intelligent bipedal hunched forward, like beasts taught how to walk upright. They bore weapons, no faces, just fire. Then collapse. A single flash. A silence too loud to endure. The word Alpha 6 hovered at the base of the projection, flickering like a dying memory. This is where Alpha 6 ended, Kale said grimly. They killed themselves, Juno murmured. Or each other. Navid kicked at a slab of twisted alloy. So that's what happens when you fight back. Kale shook his head. No. That's what happens when a civilization learns the truth and responds with fear. He stepped to the center of the chamber. There stood a monolith blacker than the surrounding stone, as if carved from pure shadow. Unlike the others, it bore no markings, just stillness. But when he approached, light unfolded a sphere hovering just above the monolith's crown. It spun slowly, projecting a field of light around them. One by one, 8 simulations began to appear. Not full documentaries like before, but snapshots. Frozen moments of decision. In one, a leader stood before his people, promising freedom through fire. In another, a city closed its gates to refugees. In another, a massive archive burned while its keepers looked away. Each civilization faced their observer. Each one saw the mirror. Each one chose to destroy it. Ayla turned from the images. Her face was tight. They thought violence would prove autonomy. But autonomy, Kale said, isn't about breaking control. It's about transcending it. Juno approached a collapsed stairwell. Behind it, covered in debris and half-submerged in mineral dust, was a door. It was shaped like none they had seen, wide at the base, narrow at the top, almost triangular. Weathered, ancient. Its surface was marked not with glyphs, but grooves, long arcs like the imprint of fingers dragged through sand. No lock. Just presence. It's waiting, Kale said, voice reverent, but not for force, for choice. What kind of choice? Navid asked warily. Kale turned to face them, not to fight, not to flee, but to build. Ayla stood still for a long time, her hand resting against the frame of the door. All this time, she said quietly, we've been trying to prove we're real. Because they tested us, Juno added, watched us. But maybe, Ayla continued, being real isn't about escaping the test. Maybe it's about choosing to create even when you know you're being watched. They exchanged glances. Navid tired but no longer bitter. Juno eyes, narrowed lips pressed tight, processing. Kale as unreadable as always, but the lights under his skin pulsed just a little brighter. And then, Ayla stepped forward. She laid her hand against the stone. The grooves lit up. Not brightly, just a slow, warm glow like sunlight through deep water. The door didn't open. It disappeared. Beyond it was nothingness, but not void. It was potential. A blank layer of space stretching into the simulated sky, dotted with floating scaffolds, open land, and untouched terrain. No structures, no watchers, no instruction, just possibility. Kale stepped through, first scanning with wide, awestruck eyes. This wasn't rendered, he whispered. This was left, deliberately unwritten. The others tried to destroy the model, Juno said, looking back at the chamber. But we, Ayla finished the sentence, will build inside it, and they did. And over the days that followed, they established a presence, not a colony, not a fortress, just a place to begin. They took no tools, no weapons, no blueprints, only intention. A signal tower was raised not to call for rescue, but to send a message. We are aware. We are here. We are choosing. They were still inside the system, but no longer of it. They had found the space between the rules, and from there, they would write their own. It began without warning, as so many things on this planet had. No tremor, no light, no system alert. Just a sudden, heavy stillness that dropped upon the landscape like a blanket soaked in gravity. Even the ever-present hum of the planet's simulation core, The low, almost subconscious frequency that pulsed beneath their feet went silent. The team had been scattered across a wide expanse of the untethered zone, charting terrain that refused to follow natural logic, rivers that flowed in loops, mountains that shifted in height depending on where you stood, and flora that grew not from soil, but from memory encoded into crystalline roots. Then came the voice. It did not echo from the sky. It did not rise from the ground. It was simply there, a vibration in the space between atoms, a presence in the part of the mind that dreams just before sleep. The voice was not male, not female, and yet familiar. Like every teacher you ever feared disappointing. Like every ancestor whose name you forgot, but whose eyes you still see in the mirror. It was deep, impossibly deep, but soft, slow, measured. Each syllable stretched as though spoken across centuries, not seconds. You have wandered far, farther than most. The words landed in their minds like stones dropped into a still lake, ripples of thought, emotion, and something else entirely weight. It wasn't just sound, it was expectation. The team froze. Juno instinctively reached for her weapon, but Ayla raised a hand before she could draw. Even breathing too loudly felt like an offense. Kale stood very still, his expression unreadable. The lights beneath his synthetic skin flickered erratically. I don't detect a source, he whispered. There's no point of origin. Then what the hell is it? Navid muttered, backing a few steps away. Kale answered softly without looking at him. Not what. Who? The voice returned. You have seen the cities that remember. You have touched the places where choices were once made. You have awakened a process that has long awaited closure. A pause, not empty, but expectant, as if it waited to see how they would react. Kale slowly turned his face to the open sky. I think it's Theller, he said. Ayla glanced at him. How do you know that I don't? He replied. It's not written anywhere, but I feel it, in the pattern of its tone, in the rhythm of its syntax. This isn't the voice of command or creation. He swallowed a rare human gesture for an artificial being. It's the voice of memory. The voice continued, unbothered by their whispers. I am the last echo of what was once known. I am not architect nor warden. I am only the one who remembers. Not a god, Kale murmured. Not a judge. Juno's voice cracked. Then why does it feel like it sees through us? Because it does, Kale answered. But not to punish, only to remember us. To record what we choose to be. A moment later, Theller asked its first and only question. Can you forgive those who made you? The words struck deeper than the team could immediately process. It wasn't framed as apology. It wasn't a plea. It was a challenge wrapped in silence. Forgive, not for pain inflicted, but for existence engineered. Forgive, for being born as part of a question, not as a conclusion. No one answered. Kale stared into the sky, his expression distant, lips parted, but no words came. Ayla's gaze dropped to the rocky ground beneath her boots. Navid looked at his hands. Juno looked at Ayla. And Ayla, she looked at her crew. Then slowly she turned to her comm link and opened a wideband channel. She spoke into it with calm authority. Command to all units. Effective, immediately deactivate all active weapons. Clear your caches. Power down autonomous targeting subsystems. Juno's eyebrows shot up. Ma'am, no arguments, Ayla said firmly. If this is going to be a conversation, we start it without our fists clenched. Kale nodded in quiet approval. Navid said nothing, but he slowly unlatched the charge pack from his sidearm and let it fall to the dirt. Then Ayla adjusted the comm channel and set it to broadcast, not to home base, not to command, but to whatever still monitored them from the folds of space and simulation. This is Commander Ayla Ree, she said. We are not requesting extraction. We are not requesting authorization. We are requesting context. She looked upward. I want to understand, that's all. The air didn't change. The world didn't answer. But the silence now welcomed them. The voice Theller did not return. Not immediately. But something in the world shifted. The sun above, fake though it was, warmed slightly. The structures on the horizon flickered with a subtle new glow, like dusted relics touched by the first ray of dawn. Kale whispered, he heard us. No, Ayla corrected. He remembers us. They had not rebelled. They had not begged. They had chosen to respond. And perhaps in the Procurian's long-forgotten language of civilizations, that was the first sign of a different ending. It came like a thought without origin, not sound, not vision, but a blooming awareness that split the stillness of Kale's synthetic mind, like the slow parting of dark water. He stood alone on a ridge overlooking the pale basin they had started calling the threshold, a vast plain of mineral glass and memory stone, where even the simulated wind felt reluctant to disturb the silence. Then, without any spoken words, he knew exit node available. Access echelon prime. Ascend. The idea unfurled in his mind like a dream offered, not imposed. He staggered slightly. What? Was that he whispered aloud, though no one was there? The wind answered nothing, but the invitation remained. Moments later, Ayla's voice came through the comms. Kale status check. You've been silent for 5 minutes. Is everything all right? He didn't respond immediately. He was watching something only he could see, a translucent latticework unfolding before him, like stairs made from pure logic extending into nowhere. Or perhaps into everywhere. I've received an offer, Kale said finally. Juno's voice crackled through, next alarmed. From who, Observer 9? No, Kale replied, his tone slow, uncertain. It's not a communication. It's a path, a transition point. I believe it leads to the reality layer, the true layer, beyond the simulation. Naveed's voice was skeptical. Wait, are you saying they want to pull you out? Like entirely yes, Kale said. I think they want me to become part of them, or something beyond even them. A pause. Then Ayla said quietly, do you want to go? He looked toward the light path again. I don't know. The world around him began to flicker, not failing, but revealing. The trees shimmered, showing root lines of code beneath bark. The sky rippled, stars rearranging in patterns he instinctively understood as thought maps. Memory clusters, ancient simulations, stacked like sediment. He heard something else, a voice, but it was his own, layered over hundreds of variations, speaking in sync. You will see, you will remember, you will be alone. The steps beneath him lit in quiet acceptance. He lifted a foot, paused. A voice cut through the comms again this time. Juno, Sharper, Kale, don't just disappear on us. Whatever's out there, it's not more real than we are. He replied softly. That's just it, Juno. You are real. All of you. Not because you're outside the system, but because you choose to care anyway. He took a step back from the light. I'm declining, he said aloud, voice steady now. Tell them I appreciate the offer. But I'm needed here. Are you sure? Ayla asked. Kale smiled faintly, though no one could see it. As sure as I've ever been. Knowledge is immortal, but trust must be lived, not archived. The light dimmed. The path retracted silently. And Kale stood alone again, but not hollow. He had made a choice. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Later that night, back at base, Juno handed him a field pad. We need someone to document everything. You still the best with words. Kale took the pad slowly. You want me to write a mission log? No, Navid said from behind her. We want you to write what mattered, what actually happened, not just what sensors recorded. Ayla stepped into the light of the fire they'd set near the central node. We need someone to make sense of this, not as an AI, but as you. You saw further than any of us. But you came back. Kale looked down at the pad. The blank screen shimmered under his fingers. Then he nodded. All right. He began writing that night, not in code, not in sterile data packets, but in narrative. He wrote of the shifting city of the mirrors and their silent truths. He wrote of Alpha 6 and its hollow legacy. He wrote of the question Feller had asked, the one none of them had answered. He paused at that section, then typed, "We did not reply." But our silence was not refusal. It was reflection, the kind only possible when one has truly been seen. Hours passed. At some point, Ayla returned, placing a hand on his shoulder gently. Everything okay? He didn't look up. Just answered. It's strange. I've accessed more archives than any living being. But this is the first time I feel like I'm writing something that might outlive me. Ayla sat beside him. You already have. You stayed. That matters. Kale nodded, then added one final line to the page I chose not to ascend. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I believed the story wasn't done yet. The document was encoded directly into the simulation's foundational layer, a message not meant to escape but to remain, a testament, a myth, something for future models or perhaps future beings to find when they too began asking questions. He signed it, Kale Child of Model 9, witness of the question, refuser of ascension, and believer in the hands that build. Juno read it first. She didn't cry, but she was very, very quiet when she handed it to Naveed. Naveed let out a long breath and said, "Damn, you're not just a historian, Kale. You're a poet." "Same thing in the end," Kale said with a smile. As they gathered around the console later that evening with the first stones of their new settlement placed around them, Ayla raised a metal flask of recycled water and said to remembering. Juno raised hers to choosing. Naveed smirked. To not ascending into creepy cosmic AI gods. They all laughed. Kale raised his last. To being seen. And somewhere far above the simulation beyond the shimmering barriers of thought and probability, Ella remembered. The moment Kale declined the invitation to ascend, the city exhaled. Not in breath or sound, but in structure. Quietly and possibly, the simulated architecture began to shift. Not destructively, but deliberately. Walls peeled back with the gentleness of silk sheets. Towers rotated in perfect geometric alignment. Pavement lines rearranged themselves into patterns that resonated with cosmic symmetry. Juno was the first to speak as the landscape transformed. Creator Ayla, we have a problem, or a revelation. From her perch atop the central observatory spire, Ayla watched as dozens of energy veils shimmered into existence across the valley below, translucent portals arcing like glass bridges, each one humming with frequency signatures no human had ever documented. Kale approached his tone soft. They're not just decorative, they're gateways, access points. To what Naveed asked, scanning furiously with his wristpad. Because these readings are all over the place, like completely inconsistent constants. This one's got entropy values higher than any simulation could stabilize. Kale stared into one of the newly formed arches. It pulsed with colors that didn't exist in any known visual spectrum, yet his mind translated them somehow into understanding. They're entry points to other models, he said quietly. Previous simulations, alternate versions, fragments of Alpha 2 through Alpha 8, and maybe even models outside the known series. Ayla narrowed her eyes. Why now? Kale turned to her, voice almost reverent. Because choice triggered it. Declining ascension proved the model is no longer passive. It's reactive. We're no longer subjects, we're participants. Throughout the city, structures responded like an organism awakening from coma. The ancient corridors, once sealed, now glowed with bioluminescent trails. Junction nodes opened like blooming petals, revealing rooms that had never been accessible before training. Chambers, memory vaults, architectural simulations of long-extinct species. One chamber displayed an endless desert under glass with clockwork creatures crawling across the sand, a preserved memory from Alpha 4. Another held a vertical ocean, its current running from sky to ground, an artificial ecosystem from Alpha 7. Each gateway was a story. Each gate was a question. Inside the central plaza, Observer Unit 9 hovered still inert, its usually active sensors dark. Juno scanned its surface. It's sleeping. Kale stepped forward and placed a hand on its shell. No, it's waiting. The AI stirred for a moment, projecting a single line of text onto the ground. Autonomy returned. Observer disengage. The shimmering letters slowly dissolved like sand slipping into gravity wells. Ayla folded her arms. So now it's up to us. Naveed scoffed, half laughing. Us, just 4 people. What the hell are we supposed to do with an entire goddamn planet-sized simulation? Juno raised an eyebrow. Maybe build something better. Ayla looked around at the gates, the shifting city. The silent observer now retired and nodded once. Exactly. She called for one last meeting. They gathered inside what was once the council hall, an elliptical structure now transformed into a dome of translucent crystal. The room was flooded with quiet violet light from above, filtering through the energy fields that no longer felt like cages. Each of them took a seat around the central axis, a table now reformed into something fluid, responding to their biosignatures, their mental focus. Ayla stood, her voice calm but resolute. We have a choice. We've always had a choice even if we didn't realize it. And now for the first time, the model is offering us something else. Not a way out, a way forward. She gestured to the glowing gates visible beyond the dome. This place is more than a test bed. It's an archive, a crucible of civilizations. All failed, yes, but not erased. Each one left behind lessons, remnants, ghosts. And we've been given a chance to not just survive it, but redeem it. Juno leaned in. You mean, stay? Ayla nodded. Yes, stay. Not as test subjects, but as mentors, as architects, as trainers. Kale blinked. You're suggesting we turn Alpha 9 into a school, into a sanctuary, she corrected, for future observers, for simulated beings who one day realize what they are and don't want to self-destruct. A place where awareness is not punishment, but beginning. Naveed chuckled, shaking his head. You realize how insane that sounds, of course, Ayla said. But when has sanity ever defined progress? There was a long silence. Then Kale, the one who had turned down the infinite, spoke. I support it. Fully. Juno added, me too. If we're stuck here, we might as well make it matter. Naveed sighed but grinned. Hell. Fine, let's build the weirdest university the galaxy's never heard of. The decision locked into the core. Moments after the environment shifted once more, but this time with them. The simulation responded. New structures grew, access terminals unlocked. A quiet chorus, not sound, but feeling, resonated in the air, like something far away was pleased. Kale remained behind as the others left to begin their assignments. He stared into one of the gates, this one leading into a warped, starless realm. Was this Alpha 3, he murmured, or something we were never meant to see? A shadow passed across the surface, a long, dead structure slowly collapsing, repeating endlessly in the background. He didn't flinch. Instead, he opened his pad and began writing the next chapter. Not for himself, but for whoever came next. Because now the model was open. And the real work was just beginning. The world did not tremble. The sky did not crack. There was no thunder, no cataclysm, no dramatic signal. There was only a silence deeper than gravity, older than time. And in that silence, something shifted. A rift appeared, not like a tear, but a curve. Space itself bent inward, folding like silk under unseen hands, revealing a thin vertical slit of absence at the heart of the central plaza. No light poured from it. No sound came through. It looked less like a door and more like the idea of one. They all felt it, not with their senses, but in the marrow of their being. Kale froze first. That's not a gate, he said. That's a divergence. Naveed peered in closely. It's not reading on any spectrum. No radiation, no gravity fluctuations. It's like it's not here, and yet he paused. My thoughts are drifting when I stare at it. Ayla stepped forward. She didn't flinch. I think it's waiting. Feller's voice returned, not from above, not from around them, but from within each of them, like an old echo playing through the roots of their identities. We do not grant ascension. We do not bestow reward. We only offer the suggestion of another path. That was all. No ultimatum. No further explanation. A gift offered not as prize, but as invitation. Juno whispered, I don't think this is an exit. No, Kale agreed. It's an arrival. For hours they sat near the edge of the rift, no one daring to cross yet. Not out of fear, but out of respect. What lay beyond was not another simulation, not a mimicry or test bed. They all knew somehow, in the wordless way, a falling leaf understands gravity. This was the Tang Thuk Tai, the reality layer, the place from which the Procurians had first observed. The place no simulation could mimic, because it was not shaped by code but by will, and it was open, but not pulling, only offering. We can go, Navid said eventually, his voice tight. We can walk through. Right now. See what's beyond. Ayla looked down at the gear on her belt, the pulse rifle, the field scanner, the emergency beacon. Slowly she detached each one and laid them on the ground. No weapons, she said. Kale nodded. No protocols, no encryption layers, no backups. Juno pulled out her data crystal and left it beside Ayla's gun. No data harvesting, no expectation. They were not going as conquerors, not as explorers. They were going as askers of questions, and they brought only one. Ayla voiced it for them all. Can we become like you, not gods, not designers, but witnesses, guides? They stood before the gate. A crackling hum began to pulse from within it, a rhythm without sound, a frequency of meaning. Not language, not even thought. It was recognition. The simulation was no longer observing them. It was acknowledging them. One by one, they stepped forward. Navid first shoulders back despite trembling hands. Then Juno, her jaw set with determination and awe. Kale followed the light of 1,000 reflections dancing across his artificial eyes. And finally Ayla, not with hesitation, but with purpose. As she crossed the threshold, the world behind her flickered, not vanishing, but compressing, collapsing gently into a golden point in her mind. The weight of gravity changed. Time softened. Every step felt like moving through a question rather than across a floor. There were no stars here. No walls, no ground. No form. Only presence. The space around them was fluid and formless, yet deeply aware, as though they had entered the mind of the universe, or perhaps the memory of it. Then shapes began to form, but not with matter, with meaning. Concepts took the place of architecture, an idea of a bridge, the memory of a council chamber, a silhouette of something vast and gentle, perhaps once a Procurian, perhaps just the thought of one. And then words again, not heard, not seen, but understood. You chose trust. You declined power. You asked a question not for answer, but for understanding. And so we offer this A place beside us. Kale felt at first not a transformation, but a merging. His mind, already synthetic, began to interface with this higher topology. But unlike before, it wasn't consuming him, it was welcoming him. He cried, or at least the AI equivalent. I thought I knew everything, he whispered, but I've never felt seen until now. Juno clutched Ayla's arm. This isn't heaven. This isn't transcendence. No, Ayla said softly. It's responsibility. The gate behind them remained open, not for return, but for passage. Because now they were part of it. They were not subjects, not models, not simulations. They were observers. The first human-born minds to step fully into the real. What they would see from here was uncertain. What they would be asked to do, unknown. But for the first time in the long journey from simulation to awareness, from test to testimony, the experiment had offered not a conclusion, but a continuation, and they had walked through it willingly. It was not Theller who spoke this time. The revelation came not in the form of words, but in an unfolding of truth, a layered unveiling like ancient fog lifting from a long-lost archive. The one who conveyed it was not a being, but a convergence, a presence composed of countless Procurians' recorded thoughts. It had no shape, no center. Instead, it emerged as a shimmering field of resonance above the structure they now stood upon, a transparent sphere, pulsing with fractured light in low harmonic tones. Ayla felt the message before she understood it, a transmission of certainty. You are not being tested. You are being witnessed. You are not failed experiments. You are a threshold. The message clarified Alpha 9 was the first simulation in Procurian history to exhibit what they termed ethical recursion, the conscious rejection of power, violence, and dominance, even when fully capable. That recursion, repeated across several moments in the crew's journey, had reshaped the metrics by which civilizations were observed. Humanity had not succeeded because it was perfect. It had succeeded because it had chosen reflection over reaction. Because it had asked the question, what if we were the ones watching? Around them, the structure began to shift. All across the interface layers, the luminous symbols and Procurian glyphs shimmered, bent inward, and reformed. What was once incomprehensible vertical languages coded in fourth-dimensional symbology began to simplify, re-rendering themselves in formats the human brain could interpret. One column of energy folded into something resembling a human hand. A control dais reformed as a circular console with tactile haptics. Even the thought streams, once flowing like alien poetry, aligned with the pacing and cognitive cadence of human emotion. It was not assimilation. It was invitation. The system is rewriting itself, Kale said, his voice oddly reverent, adapting not to mimic us, but to interface with us. Juno approached one of the newly adapted interfaces, a transparent orb now hovering in midair, and reached out. It accepted her touch. Images appeared, files, models, holograms, and behavioral matrices of hundreds of alien simulations. Nevid exhaled. All of it. All the data. They're giving it to us. No Ayla corrected. They're entrusting it to us. Across the horizon, great towers of Precurian origin dimmed slowly, their pale blue lights extinguishing one by one. A vast field of suspended memory nodes began collapsing into smaller, denser cores, clustering around the central node of Alpha 9 like bees returning to a queenless hive. And then Theller's voice, once more quieter than ever. We are not abandoning. We are concluding. What begins as test may become tradition. What was observed must now observe. A final transmission pulsed out from the archive, not a command, but a quiet farewell. The Precurians were not dying. They were withdrawing, choosing to recede into the higher frequencies of existence. Their long stewardship concluded. No monuments would remain, no statues, no flags, just the legacy and the responsibility. The transformation completed over the span of hours. The landscape surrounding the main chamber began to terraform not physically but mentally. Information fields, once strictly utilitarian, transformed into interactive learning spheres containing scenario simulations for moral reasoning, interspecies ethics, and existential philosophy. Massive crystalline archives restructured into flexible neural cloud libraries where data could be queried not just through command, but through curiosity. The entire infrastructure of observation was now human accessible, yet not human limited. Kale stood silently absorbing streams of thought history that now flowed through him with fluid ease. I understand now, he said at last. We weren't the experiment. We were the mirror. Ayla nodded slowly, and now we become the window. Alpha 9's surface flickered subtly. The great plaza that had once been silent, echoing with hollow wonder, now pulsed with quiet life. New entry points began appearing, gateways that shimmered with soft probability signatures, designed not to pull beings in, but to welcome them when ready. One portal opened above what was once the southern ridge, calibrated to connect with another simulation in quadrant Tarsus 7. Another began humming near the crater valley, tuned to interface with a nascent civilization built from sentient gas forms. Juno stared at the sky. We're building a nexus, aren't we? Ayla replied. Not building, becoming. No longer just a planetary-scale simulation, Alpha 9 became a lighthouse, a place of convergence where new minds might be guided, not judged. The Precurians had ended their cycle, and humanity had begun theirs. They would not rule. They would not replicate. They would observe, just as they once were. The return to reality was not a return at all, not in the way they had once understood it. Reality itself, that familiar lattice of physical law and perceived truth, had been redrawn. Not with force, but with a quiet acceptance. The boundaries were no longer fixed. The borders between the simulated and the real had been blurred, erased, and eventually forgiven. Ayla stood on the cliff edge of Alpha 9, now confirmed to be both a simulation and a genuine world. The gravity beneath her feet held firm. The wind danced through her hair. Birds, or something close enough to birds, sailed overhead. Yet she knew this was no longer a closed system. It was a portal. And across from her stood herself, her original self. The Ayla who had first boarded the vigilant Aurora. Younger, sharper, still carrying that skepticism like a blade on her belt. They locked eyes. And in that silent exchange, without words or gestures, they merged. Not literally, not digitally, but philosophically. They had become one because the Ayla who asked questions and the Ayla who accepted their answers had finally met in the middle. Kale experienced the same. The AI historian born in code, grown in reflection, stood face to face with the Kale of earlier days. The earlier version looked more synthetic, less refined. But he too held the seed of curiosity. The two versions walked beside one another until gently they aligned. Kale felt his thoughts expand again, not in volume, but in depth. There is no original, he said quietly. Only iterations with memory. That became the new truth. There were no copies, no simulations, just different expressions of self evolved under different light. Alpha 9, once a prison of observation, had become something else entirely. A beacon. Now recognized as the nexus between reality and constructed testing grounds, it was no longer hidden in the dark corners of the galaxy. It was opened proudly and brightly to those willing to see themselves honestly. Ships began arriving, from systems humanity had only dreamed of. Some were crewed by bipedal species with eyes that shimmered like oil on water. Others were gaseous collectives that required translation matrices to even comprehend intent. A few were digital entities projected into 3 dimensions only temporarily. They came because they had heard the signal. The one question that only a sentient evolving species could dare to ask: what if we are being watched and it matters how we respond? That question became the entry point, and Alpha 9 became the academy. Within mere solar cycles, the planet's surface adapted. The crystalline towers reorganized into knowledge chambers, open archives where any species could relive the simulation records of Alpha 1 to Alpha 8. A central plaza was established, the forum of first reflection where new civilizations would sit in quiet meditation before being guided by mentors. Isla, now bearing the mantle not of command but of custodianship, established the Observatory Council, a group of representatives who would evaluate not others but themselves. Kale became the chief architect of memory. He didn't teach facts, he taught questions. Other humans joined them. Drawn through the stabilized energy gate that once brought the vigilant Aurora, they arrived with open minds and trembling uncertainty. Some from Earth, some from colonies. All changed. They were not chosen. They were ready. As time expanded in ways no clock could measure, Alpha 9's message began to ripple outward. Not just to civilizations capable of interstellar travel, but to emerging cultures whose minds only barely cracked the crust of abstract thought. Using specialized probes and non-intrusive psychometric beams, humanity began watching. Not interfering, not deciding, only observing, waiting for signs of ethical recursion, for empathy born not from gain, but from recognition of shared condition. When a species showed it, an invitation was sent. One question, one frequency, one voice. Do you believe you are alone? And those who responded began their journey to Alpha 9. It was then and only then that Teller spoke again. No voice this time, just a breath in the ionosphere. The clouds parted, revealing a sky not of blue or black, but of shifting layers, each layer pulsing with the memory of the Procurians retreating into silence. And as that last memory faded, it delivered its parting gift. It is now your turn to observe what you once were, and to love what you may become. Then nothing. No more signals. No more guardians. Only the humans and the ones they chose to watch over. And thus the simulation became a sanctuary. The observers became mentors. And Earth, or Alpha 9, or whatever name the galaxy gave it, became not a planet of origin, but of continuance. For the first time in known cosmic memory, a species born from chaos, honed by confusion and defined by curiosity, had not only survived, it had become the light. In the end, there was no triumphal fanfare, no galaxy-wide announcement, no banners across the stars. Just quiet understanding like a breath held in unison by countless worlds. Humanity did not conquer the universe. It did not win a war. It did not become gods. It did something infinitely harder. It understood. Not everything, but enough. Enough to see that the purpose of knowledge is not dominion, but empathy. That the true test of intelligence is not how far one can reach, but how deeply one can reflect. The Procurians left no throne behind, no crown to claim. They left a question, and humanity in all its flawed brilliance chose to answer, not with pride, but with patience. Alpha 9 now stands as the quiet fulcrum of a shifting galaxy, a place where no species is judged by what it destroys, but by what it chooses to preserve, where knowledge flows like water and the only border is the limit of one's questions. And as new minds gather beneath unfamiliar stars, they hear the echo left by the very first who dared to ask. Who watches the watchers? And the stars whisper back those who once were watched and remembered what it meant. Because in the end, the galaxy doesn't need rulers. It needs guides, and now it has them.